All right. Last time we talked about how in the steppes of Asia, entire cities would be moved as a giant group together, which is in stark contrast to how Lehi and his family made their way through the wilderness. And also, we talked a little about the symbol of the honeybee, meaning Deseret, being a very holy symbol, which was meant to be a representative or replacement for the name of God. Deborah is a name that is connected with the honeybee. And Deborah was a prophetess in Israel who sat underneath a tree, again, the symbol of the tree, being a divine feminine symbol, and helped Israel in the Old Testament. And, that's just kind of a further explanation of that. And we get the idea of Deseret for Utah and the honeybee from ether. Not, apparently, I didn't know this until I saw a snippet of it yesterday on YouTube, that apparently a commentator, Candace Owens, decided that we're all evil commies because the honeybee had to do with some sort of Polish communist symbol. I have no idea. What's so terrible and sad about this is, again, it's people trying to seek offense where none is intended, or seek to offend. I don't know how to put it, but the idea is that our idea of Deseret, the honeybee, industry, etc., all stem from ether in the Book of Mormon. So it's way old. Because, remember, the Jaredites were way, 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 way before the Book of Mormon, the Nephites and such. So, yeah. Us tying that to communism and whatever else, it's just weird that she would do that. And it's unfortunate that she'd do that. Because, again, it's trying to look for blame when there isn't one. For example, after recent events, I had heard comments from others about how they thought that the shooting in Grand Blanc, Michigan would have been by one particular type of group of people over another. Even I had my own views, because I was wondering, okay, what's happening up there in Michigan? And would it be this type of people or this other type of people that someone had talked about? I'm like, well, we'll find out. We found out pretty darn quick. It was just someone who was probably fairly right-leaning. I mean, they were a war vet, probably had some war troubles, big American flags in the back of their truck. But most importantly, they believed this evangelical and anti-Mormon hype that we're demons and it's a church of the devil. And you're like, really? We talk of Christ, we preach of Christ, we teach our children who to look to for their salvation through Christ, so that way, we can all join together in Christ. But yet, people ignore all that. Just like flat earthers, just whenever evidence is presented to them, if it suddenly refutes directly and in the face of whatever they are saying or believing, they suddenly just walk right by it. And so, I think it's very important to understand where symbols truly, truly come from and why. Even the symbols that become the worst of things. Like, originally, there are symbols that have been turned into symbols of evil and terribleness throughout the world. They had their origins in purely good and hopeful things. But because they were used by Satan and his minions, or people who are evil and who do very, very evil things, it became something that is forbidden, basically. It is meant to cause harm as it's used now, which is very sad. So even if symbols that now are used for harm and evil can and do abound in our society, understanding the true origins of where did it come from is important. Why? It's not to excuse what is caused under the banner of that kind of evil, but it's so that you actually know the truth. Like, for example, this. The honeybee of Utah, the Deseret, the beehive state, industry, all that comes from ether. It comes from it being something that's holy, something that's meant to drive us in having a good, strong work ethic and to push forward with everything that we have. I have more thoughts on that, but I think it's important to get to the world of the Jaredites. All right, let us continue. Early Asiatic and Jaredite civilization, a general view. A few lines above, I suggested that the Jaredites were but one of the various tribes moving outward in all directions from a common center to plant a common proto-historic civilization in various regions of the earth. I was thinking in terms of the latest researches, and it did not occur to me at the time that the picture of the Great Dispersion is exactly that depicted in the Bible and Book of Mormon. If we are to believe a single civilization was spread throughout the world the world in the beginning, and historians have now learned that such was actually the case, scholars no longer argue as to whether Egypt or Mesopotamia was the true founder of civilization, for we now know that both were derived from a common source, a world civilization spread over an immense area, and by no means localized in the Orient. With the finding of the royal cemeteries at Ur, scholars began to suspect that both Egypt and Babylonia took their civilizations from an unknown common source, which, in the beginning at least, united all the civilizations of the world in a single world civilization, of which all subsequent civilizations are but variations on variations on a theme. In my recent studies on the origin of the superstate, I have tried to show that the original heart and center of the world civilization is to be located somewhere in Central Asia, from which the conquering hordes have periodically spilled over into the provincial or peripheral areas of India, China, Egypt, and Europe, there to establish kingly and priestly dynasties. And now it would seem that the New World must be included in this Asiatic system. For Professor Frankfurt reports that in such striking cases as the early Chinese bronze, or the design of Mexican sculpture, or the Northwest American Indians, one must reckon to a greater extent than most of us hitherto prepared to admit, with the possibility of diffusion from Eastern Europe and Middle East. A few years ago, this would have been high treason to American archaeologists, but now it serves as another indication of the unity of world civilization, which we are beginning to realize was as characteristic of ancient as of modern history. In the case of the Nephites, it was possible to locate exactly the old world centers of culture from which their civilizations sprang. Can we do the same for the Jaredites? I think so. Bold claim! He goes for the throat! So they came from a region that served in ancient times as a veritable marshalling area for world invasions. That is where their culture belongs, and that is where it fits. It is still too early to attempt a detailed picture of life in the days of the dispersion. The archaeology of nomad Central Asia is still in its infancy, writes G.N. Roerich. A new branch of historical science is coming into being, the object of which will be to build up the nomad state and to study the remains of a great forgotten past. But the general picture begins to take form. Let me quickly sketch for you the rough outline. The basic fact is space. Vast expanses of grassland, woods, and mountains, where hunters and herdsmen have ranged since time immemorial, trespassing on each other's territory, raiding each other's settlements, stealing each other's cattle, grimly escaping and pursuing by turns. In good times, the tribes multiply, and there is crowding. In bad times, they are forced to invade each other's lands in search of grass. The result is chronic chaos, a condition which has been a standing challenge to the genius and ambition of men with a talent for leadership. Periodically, the great man appears in Asia to unite his own jangling tribesmen in fanatical devotion to himself, subdue his neighbors one after another, and finally, by crushing a great coalition, bring all resistance to an end, and at last bring peace and order to the world. The endless expanse of the steppes and the lack of any natural boundaries call for statesmanship in the grand manner, both the concept and techniques of empire being, in fact, of Asiatic origin. For a time, one mind nearly succeeds in ruling the world, but a quick reckoning comes when the great man dies. In a world scramble for the throne among his ambitious relatives, the world empire promptly collapses. Yep. Space, the force that produced the superstate, now destroys it by allowing disgruntled and scheming heirs and pretenders to go off by themselves to distant regions and found new states with the hope in time of absorbing all the others and restoring world dominion. The chaos of the steppes is not the primitive disorder of small, savage tribes accidentally colliding from time to time in their wanderings. It is rather, and has always been, a shrewd game of chess, played by men of boundless ambition and formidable intellect, with mighty armies at their disposal. For a general treatment of this theme, see Ellsworth Hunting's Mainsprings of Civilization. Now, to return to the Jaredites, their whole history is the tale of a fierce and unrelenting struggle for power. The Book of Ether is a typical ancient chronicle, a military and political history relieved by a casual reference to the wealth and splendor of kings. You will note that the whole structure of Jaredite history hangs on a succession of strong men, most of them rather terrible figures. Few annals of equal brevity are frightened with an equal burden of wickedness. The pages of Ether are dark with intrigue and violence, strictly of the Asiatic brand. When a rival for the kingdom is bested, he goes off by himself in the wilderness and bides his time while gathering an army of outcasts. This is done by drawing off men of him to himself through lavish bestowal of gifts and bribes. The forces thus won are retained by the taking of terrible oaths. When the aspirant to the throne finally becomes strong enough to dispose of his rivals by assassination, revolution, or a pitched battle, the former bandit and outlaw becomes king and has to deal in turn with the new crop of rebels and pretenders. It is exactly as one were reading the Arab Shah's grim and depressing Life of Timur, the biography of a typical Asiatic conqueror, with its dark allusions to the supernatural and especially to the works of the devil. It is a strange and savage picture of nightmare politics that the Book of Ether paints, but it is historically a profound and true picture. Take a few examples from the Old World. In the oldest records of the race, we find the supreme god, founder of the state and cult, winning his way to the throne by battle, often by violence against family predecessors, which generally involves horrific and obscene incidents. See C.J. Gadd, Ideas of Divine Rule in the Ancient East. The abominations of the ancients, about which Ether has a good deal to say, are thus seen to have a respectable antiquity. There is now ample reason for believing that the oldest empires known to us were by no means the first, and that the familiar processes go back to prehistoric times. Empires must have been formed and destroyed then, as they were to be later on. Such empires were not the result of gradual expansion or development, but would rapidly become enormous empires under the leadership of a single great man. McGovern observes, and under the reign of his successors slowly but surely declined. Though in many cases they disintegrate immediately after the death of their founders. See Early Empires by McGovern. The fugitive who gathers forces in the wilderness by drawing off people from his rival is a strictly conventional figure on the steppes. That is the way every great conqueror begins. Lu Fang, the leader of a small military band, half soldier, half bandits, nearly won the Hunnish and Chinese empires for himself 2,000 years ago, and would have done so had not some of his own ambitious officers deserted him, just as he had deserted others. It was after cheating his brother of the throne that Attila hoped to subdue the entire world. And after his death, 2 of his descendants went out into the wilderness, and there gathered about them armies of outcasts, each hoping to win back the world empire for himself. You'll remember that Genghis Khan lived for years as an outcast and a bandit, as he gathered around him the forces that were to conquer all his rivals, and that those forces were actually drawn off from the armies of rivals themselves. Under the nomad system, the leaders and bagadeurs and noyans strove to become independent by attracting subjects and followers of their own. In a world where every man was filled with the desire to become an independent prince, and every prince to become lord of all, the boldest adventurers flocked to the banner of the new and successful chieftain of the race. In the beginning, oh God, you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of modern politics. Let me explain my bold claim here. Our modern politics here in the United States, and often in other countries as well, is the idea that you reach out to and you try and make inroads with the people who feel disaffected. And you do so to the point that you build up a zealous fervor that I'm for you, so that you can rise to power. And then once they're in power and they start doing everything, hopefully they keep their promises, and it makes you feel like, yeah, I backed the right guy, right? But if they don't fulfill their promises, or they don't fulfill everything that you want, often that makes them feel disaffected. And so those people who are disaffected, well, maybe I should have voted for the other guy. Or it's along the lines of, okay, so one party gets in power, they start doing things, it makes that party who is in power much more lax because they are actually accomplishing their stuff. So the other party that has been disaffected because they are no longer in power are like, we need to fight harder, we feel oppressed, we need to do this. And they won't try and gather and make inroads for the people who don't feel like they're being heard from those who were supposed to be helped by this common area and rise to power again. And so you have this pendulum back and forth. That is extremely simple. I do not think that is by any means a blanket way of truly assessing how things go, because the details are different each time. There tends to be this pendulum swing. There was like an XKCD comic, which I no longer follow, but there was a comic back in the time where it showed this idea of, oh, the president gets elected, then the president gets elected, and then he loses in the midterms, and then they lose the president, and it comes back, and then it just switches between the two parties through this pendulum-like effect. And that's fairly common in a lot of systems, is wave-like formations of periodicity in all sorts of different ways. So, we shall see, I suppose. Pardon me. So, that's why this kind of reminds me of that, is that in the Book of Ether, in many ways, they didn't really always, they didn't get rid of the former leaders. They held them in prison, and yet people gathered around them, which I always thought was weird, because I'm like, he's in prison, so how is this going to work? But yeah, and a lot of the tactics that they had also seemed to stem from stuff that you'd find in Jonah Barnes' Lost Gems of Genesis, talking about the antediluvians, the ones who would connive in death and murder and other such things. So that's why it reminds me of all this. So let me continue. Asia rallied to the standard of 15-year-old Ma Chunying as he calmly worked out a plan for the conquest of the whole world. Not only is the Jaredite practice of seeking to draw off to one's own side the followers of a rival while building up an army in the wilderness in the best Asiatic tradition, but the method of doing it is likewise in the best accepted tradition. Thus, Achish bound his followers around the nucleus of his family. The Asiatic conquerors are fanatically family conscious. By lavish gifts for the people of Achish were desirous for gain, even as Achish was desirous for power. Wherefore the son of Achish did offer them money, by which means they drew away the more part of the people after them. It was the sons of Genghis Khan, you will remember, who did most of his campaigning for him, and from the very beginning the secret of his power was the huge heap of precious things that always stood near his throne, and from which, after the immemorial custom of the steppes, he rewarded all who joined him. In the 6th century, Menander, a Roman ambassador to the court of the Grand Khan, beheld 500 wagons full of gold, silver, and silken garments that accompanied the monarch on his wanderings. For the ancient law of the Khans was that none enters the presence of the ruler empty-handed, nor departs hence unrewarded. The pattern of steppe imperialism, according to Vernadsky, begins with accumulated wealth in the hands of some able chieftain, which enables him to expand his popularity among neighboring clans. All observers of the Asiatic system have commented on the dedicated zeal with which the men of the steppes devote themselves to two objectives: power and gain. Wow. They are inseparable, of course, and each begets the other, but nowhere is all government put on such a frankly mercenary basis as in Asia, where the most venal ambassadors of the West have been embarrassed equally by the frankness and astuteness of their Asiatic hosts, to whom all life is simply a business deal. This quality is particular to Jaredite society appears from the fact that the twin motives of power and gain receive far more attention in the Book of Ether than anywhere else in the Book of Mormon, as a glance at the concordance will show. But if the ambitious chieftain gains adherents by bribery, he keeps them by oaths. The oath is the cornerstone of the Asiatic state, as of the Jaredite Achish again furnishes an excellent example. And it came to pass that Achish gathered in unto the house of Jared all his kinsfolk, and said unto them, Will ye swear unto me that ye will be faithful unto me in the thing which I shall desire of you? And it came to pass that all sware unto him by the God of heaven, and also by the heavens, and also by the earth, and by their heads, that whoso should vary from the assistance which Achish desired should lose his head. Okay, sorry. Remember that oath, and remember what Jesus Christ said in the New Testament, especially on the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, contrast it to where he says, do not swear by heaven, because that is God's home, and by the earth, because that is his footstool, nor by the hair on your heads. Like literally, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus Christ says, you do not make this oath at all. And this is exactly what Akish is doing. It is literally the antithesis to how God wants you to do things. And Akish did administer unto them the oaths which were given of them of old who sought power, which had been handed down even from Cain. So this oath, in particular, is literally the oath of what the Book of Mormon would call Gadianton robbers, or which another common term in the church is secret combinations. And frankly, if you find any type of swearing like this, because, okay, for us as a culture, I don't think, swearing by the God of heaven and heavens and the earth and the head and our heads really has that deep spiritual, cultural significance like it did in the past. We just don't hold it to be the same kind of thing, but the part that does hold is the idea of if anyone breaks the oath, their head is going to be taken. By threat of violence, you promise to do these things. And if you don't, you will be dead. That, And Akish did administer, from Cain. All right. Note that these terrible oaths are traced back explicitly to the Old World. The very oldest texts in the oldest language in the world, according to Hamel, are incantations, having the stereotyped conclusion, let it be sworn, or conjured, by the name of heaven. Let it be sworn by the name of earth. Whoa. What book does he grab that from? Dude. Vernadsky, okay, yeah. So, just who he was talking about. Wow. That's creepy stuff. From the flood of documents that have come forth of recent years to teach us the ways of men at the dawn of history, it is apparent that oaths, conspiracies, and combinations were the established order of things from the beginning. And what's terrible is once they take root and that kind of corruption takes over as the culture, woe to be to any man who does not want to join. Just think of that. Just think of your entire culture. Let's say it was just everyone on the steps, or let's just say it was anyone and in any particular type of country, where someone who is a strong man or strong leader is this is not only mob and mafia type stuff and gangs, because that would be kind of the modern day equivalent of Gadianton robbers and secret combinations. Not only is it like that, but it's stronger and darker and more visceral and dangerous than that. That if you have a culture where, okay, well, let's go be a mercenary for this guy because he's going to be the next ruler. Let's live off the fat of this guy conquering. I may lose my life, but at least I can live it up until the time's done, or maybe I'll have food on my plate until I'm toast, and then these rulers get what they want, but I at least survive. When you compromise your principles to the point that you're the one that's going to be doing these kind of things, it's just, I weep for any culture or civilization that is steeped in that kind of destructive behavior, where the good man with good principles is literally saw as a sucker and taken advantage of. I really pray we never degenerate to that far. I really, really pray that we don't. Because, the whole fight between good and evil, I think the only reason we always keep saying in the books that we read to our children that good wins, good triumphs over evil, love conquers all, that kind of stuff, I believe that's only because there is a divine finger on the scale. If that divine finger was not there, I do not think that good wins over evil. I mean, look at it. Seriously, look at it. Look at the antediluvian period. God had to have his finger tip the scale, and okay, after Enoch goes out and finds all the righteous, and all the righteous who are really righteous are taken up into heaven, okay, they're preserved. But that means wickedness is still running rampant. But God needs to fulfill his promise that the Messiah will come through to help save everyone that he can. And he, Deus ex machina, floods the world to restart it. And then here we have, after the flood, there's only a few branches that are being kept track of in the Bible, which frankly aren't exactly the greatest examples of humanity, but they were the best for their time, where eventually after Noah, we go through a bunch of generations and then skip basically to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Abraham was going to, in the book of Abraham, he was going to be sacrificed by his own father because of the spread of Egyptian idol worship and child sacrifice, which was a repeat from before the flood. And Abraham finds the one true God by becoming a friend to God, by accepting all that God wanted to give him. But even he has trouble in his own family because he has his second wife and Ishmael. They need to be put out so that Isaac can have the covenant. And why did Isaac get the covenant? Because he was so faithful. He was literally willing to be completely sacrificed, to literally be the sacrifice. That Abraham and Isaac were such a type of Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ that no wonder it is the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And Isaac was so faithful that he was like, yeah, go ahead, sacrifice me. That's fine, I understand. Because it is the will of God, and God is the God of everything, including over life and death. I mean, that type of faithfulness. And that's how Abraham could be a friend to God, because he was a father sacrificing his son. His only son left. The one through which everything was supposed to come. It is a really exact type of Jesus Christ. And so, yeah, Isaac earns his place as one of the great patriarchs because of his willingness to follow the will of the Lord. And then after Isaac, you have Jacob and Esau, and Jacob becomes Israel. So the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, and all that, it's just, remember, these families were not perfect, but I'll tell you what, compared to what these guys had gone through, yeah, they were a heck of a lot better than what they had around them. So maybe we should cut them a little slack. I really, 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 really hope people do not degenerate back to this. I really hope. Because, yeah. Anyways, what better illustration of this could one ask than the Great Babylonian New Year? Oh, wait. Their combination established order of things from the beginning. Okay, yeah. What better illustration of this could one ask than the Great Babylonian New Year's hymn, the Eruma Elish, in which Tiamat, aiming at the rule of the universe, draws off the gods to her side, so that they conspire unceasingly, night and day, against the rightful ruler, and gather themselves together in a host to make battle. When he heard the news, the true king sat upon his throne, grim and silent, without saying a word. Then he smote his thigh, he bit his lip, controlled his voice, and finally gave the order to assemble his army, which by formal acclamation took the oath of allegiance to its leader, Marduk. This story, which goes back to the beginning of things, the actual text
comes from the first Babylonian dynasty, is no mere primitive fantasy. It is the authentic and familiar picture of the great Khan, who learns that a relative and rival is raising an army against him in the wilderness. And frankly, since it's such a typification and it's showing the gods preparing to do the same thing, I'm wondering if Satan is kind of following that same idea. And that's why that plan is so familiar, that he drew off a third of the host of heaven to make war with God. That's what it's reminding me of, frankly. So even though it was this Tiamat, I think Tiamat's a woman, isn't she? Yeah. Sometimes it changes over time. But, yeah. We use these things in fantasy nowadays. Like, we may take these stories of old gods and their names and change them into these crazy-looking beasts based on whatever the fanciful desire of the artists is. So, like in Dungeons & Dragons, Tiamat is like some big, giant, huge beast or something in Final Fantasy. And I wonder if that's something that comes from Final Fantasy. Sorry, I'm mixing in all these secular stuff, current secular things of how stuff is depicted. The story of the rise and career of any great conqueror is a long catalog of terrible oaths taken and broken. The most solemn of these oaths are sealed by the drinking of blood, as when the king of the Cumaeans had the emperor of Constantinople and the people to be blooded, and each drank alternately of the other's blood. The study of the oldest annals of Asia conducts us, as does the study of the oldest languages, into the world of oaths and covenants. And why should this be so? The explanation is simple, for the purpose of the oath is to bind. Jeez Louise. Sorry, there's a footnote down here. The whole career of Genghis Khan is a long succession of terrible oaths, the most solemn being taken by a bag full of blood. Wow. And the book that comes from... Jeez Louise. Okay, so the purpose of the oath is to bind. The Egyptian word for oath, to give one example, is simply ankh. A-N-K-H. Oh, really? I always thought the ankh was this cross with the hole at the top. And I get that from Garfield's Adventures. Garfield's Imaginative Adventures. The holy ankh. So, I pull my information from all sorts of weird places, baby. Simply ankh. Originally a knot. Oh. So if you depict that in a hieroglyph, that would explain why it has that hole and then the three. Okay. It means knot. In a world of vast open spaces and limited population, where wandering nomads may take independence for themselves by hunting beasts or driving cattle over limitless grasslands, how can men be bound to any spot or leader? They must be tied by oaths, because there is no other way of holding them. Of course, every effort was made to render the oath as binding, that is, as terrible as possible. And, of course, such oaths were broken whenever convenient. Oof, and that's another thing. To make an oath and make a lie. And the ease with which men of the steppes can pass from one camp to another has always kept their kings in a state of suspicious alert, so that Asiatic monarchy is at all times enveloped in a stifling and very Jaredite-ish atmosphere of suspicion and intrigue. Oh, again, I sit here and think about, okay, this is why honesty, just one simple basic principle of honesty with yourself, honesty with others, honesty with the world is pivotal to having a stable civilization. One. Because just imagine if you had truly loyal people because they were possessed with the idea that honesty, true honesty, is the better policy. It pays dividends. Just imagine, you are one of these step rulers and kings, but you're able to teach the people that true honesty is a better thing. And that you should give up the idea of skipping out on your promises to go with the other guy who's going to reward you more. Or you should skip out on the idea of going with the other guy because you think you'll survive better that way, or whatever angle you have. But instead, back the guy you think is actually going to be better. It's just staggering how much of a benefit that would be, especially if most of the people got that idea and really hammered it into the next generation. One principle. Wow. No wonder they had so many problems. If your society is degenerated to that point, because what did they inherit it from? They inherited it from the antediluvians. Whew. Mithra rules, says Avesta, by virtue of his 10,000 spies, which make him alone of all kings undeceivable. Jeez! One more sentence, and I'm just like, no wonder every, conqueror wants to have 1,000 spies. God, 1984, why not have cameras everywhere? Why not have infinite amount of spies at our fingertips because of computers? Why not have infinite amount of spies where everything is done digitally, so we always know who is spending money on what? And wouldn't it be convenient if we had some sort of supercomputer that could go through it all at once to find, whenever we would want, someone who has broken the law in the way that we would like to say? Oh, why is it that we are going back to this stuff? Oh, Zion, dear Zion, I wish to go to that Zion where people are honest and true, where people are ruled by their dictates of their own conscience to choose good over evil of their own free will because it's the right and good thing to do, not because there's 1,000 spies looking down. Oh. Let me continue. Wow, that was just one sentence. Mithra rules, says Avesta, by virtue of his 10,000 spies, which makes him alone of all kings undeceivable. That comes from the Zend Avesta of Oxford, 1895. This is the institution of the king's eyes and the king's ears, perfected by the Persians and inherited by the monarchs of many lands. The success of any conspiracy against such watchful royalty depends therefore on secrecy and surprise before all else. And so we have, as the unfailing adjunct and nemesis of Asiatic kingship, the secret society, investing all life with a paralyzing sense of insecurity. As Honers notes, and overthrowing dynasties and empires in a single night. Asia's gift to the world as many times as... Hey, dearie. Oh, you're putting them in here?
Yep.
Okay. Mama.
No, go ahead.
Just leave her be.
Okay. Okay. And we get to go.
And I think this is why we have an over-reliance on the security state.
Okay.
Come here, kitty. Watch out, she's behind the door. So, to me, this screams of things like the CIA and FBI being, in so many movies, books, TVs, etc., the center of conspiracies. Because, it's natural. Okay, you're one of these steps kings through your amassing of wealth by whatever means you accomplish that, to the dispersing of your kingdom through grabbing people by the money, the promises, and the oaths, you disperse your kingdom everywhere. You want to still gain power, so you institute a network of spies. That network of spies keeps you alive. That may work for your entire lifetime, or it may turn on you, because when the spies realize, wait a minute, what if we, as a network of spies, decide to take on all the responsibility ourselves and, I don't know, be the ones who are the heirs that get to take over? Yeah, it becomes quite interesting. Who in the world was trying to call me at this time? Sorry, I'll deal with that in a moment. I want to finish this chapter out because this is just crazy amazing stuff. Let's see here. The success of any conspiracy against such watchful royalty depends therefore on the secrecy and surprise before all else. And so we have, as the unfailing adjunct, the nemesis of the Asiatic king, the secret society, investing all life with a paralyzing sense of insecurity, as Hornus notes, and overthrowing dynasties and empires in a single night. The reader is reminded that fellowships and secret societies have always been the foundation of Asiatic governments from Peking to Cairo. Asia's gift to the world has many times saved the world from Asia's rule, for how many an Assyrian, Persian, or Mongol conqueror has had to turn his back on the West just as he stood on the verge of world conquest to quench the fires of rebellion set by the secret conspiracies of relatives behind his back. The normal constitution of Asiatic empire, write Huret and Delaporte, is despotism tempered by dethronement and assassination, in which the clergy play the leading role. Oof! Yeah. You know? For better or for worse, every ruler of the steppes, however great his personal power and prestige, has to reckon on the presence of a class of ambitious and powerful priests, usually shamans. Even Genghis Khan, in the mightiest of all of them, was nearly pushed from his throne by an ambitious high priest. At the end, and at the dawn of history, more than one such high priest seized rule for himself. In the case of the brother of Shared, whose high priest murdered him as he sat upon the throne, is then thoroughly typical, and that by no mere coincidence, for we are not only told that the system was inherited from them of old and perpetuated by the same methods of secret societies, family compacts, bribes, oaths, assassinations, etc., as in the old world, but we are given a clear image of the physical background of the whole thing. We are told, for example, how the son of Achish, enraged at his father for the inhuman death of his brother by starvation, how typical, went out and joined the growing host of the deposed King Omer, who, since he had been overthrown by a secret combination of Achish and his friends, had been dwelling in tents and gathering strength for a comeback. See Ether 9:3 and verse 9. Note the apparent fluidity of Jaredite society, the possibility of large parties of people wandering here and there over a sparsely settled continent. Note also how closely conditions upon the face of this north country duplicate those prevailing in the same latitudes on the other side of the world, where much the same landscape also prevails. This, we shall see later, is very significant, for it plainly points to the possible origins of much of the Indian way of life among the hunters and nomads of Asia at a very early date, and the very thesis that has so often been thrown up as the strongest argument against the Book of Mormon is first propounded by the Book of Mormon itself. But more of this later. Remember how I was yesterday talking about how, look, this one group pushes out another group kind of stuff of the North American tribes. It could also be found in the Central Asian steppes. So he's going back to that point again, but holy cow, how amazingly rich the enrichment of the idea that, look, the whole
world of conquerors of Genghis Khan and Asiatic rulers comes from the idea of going back and forth, having a strong and mighty man go out through the dispersion of his money and promises and oaths, conquer all this land. They help fulfill his promises. He may set up a bunch of spies, if he's smart, to prevent people from backstabbing him, which ultimately, even if he lives to the end of his days, there's people who are plotting either to take over from him or take over before he's ousted through death of age. So, yeah. Wow. Boy, howdy does that bring everything alive. And boy, howdy does that really explain the Jaredite civilization. And boy, howdy does it just be like, ooh, how in the world? I mean, and I found it funny that he talked about high priests being the ones to do that, because they were kind of the ones who were the keeper of people in the culture to accomplish the tasks that they want. Well, imagine if you had, again, I've been really impacted by the lost gems of Genesis. I've been impacted because I sit there and go, the people who were supposed to be the keepers of goodness and righteousness. Hey, can you stop with eating apple? You're zooming around and going up my curtains, you goofball. But I've been affected by the idea that the people who were supposed to be the righteous ones, the ones who were temple covenant keepers, who were on the mountain of the Lord, who were the sons of Seth, and Seth was in the image of Adam, and Adam was in the image of God, and they were all supposed to be righteous. But those sons of Seth became the watchers, and then those watchers became the mighty men down on the plain. You too? Come on. Come on. So, yeah, that really affected me, because I sit there and go, it doesn't matter how good we are as members of the Church of Jesus Christ, that if we sit there and we keep watching and looking after, why can't we do that? Or why don't we get those promises? Why don't we get this kind of stuff? We can fall, and when anyone who is good and righteous and knows their stuff falls, and they fall hard, the world becomes a whole lot worse. Those sons of perdition, it makes me squirm. It makes me worried beyond all get out that it doesn't matter how good I think I'm doing or anyone else around me thinks that they're doing, if they just keep looking at the evil things of the world going, well, why don't we get to do that? Or why don't we take care of things in that way? It brings nothing but heartache, pain, destruction, and death. You do have to sacrifice yourself in all things. Oh, God. Let's take, for example, one last thing about this. Get off my curtains, you goober. She's just looking to pounce on her brother. What? And he's looking to pounce from below, but he uses claws to get up. This little goober. All right, go after your sister. Stop clawing me. Stop. You guys are just zooming around, causing such trouble. Such trouble. You're funny. Anyway. Sorry about the distraction of the cats. They're super cute, but they can be a handful when they're having their morning runarounds. But for example, online, there's a ton of community about men showing that how modern women are modern, and I put this as modern secular women who really have no concept or desire to follow principles, because that's really kind of what it comes down to. Become very transactional in their relationships, or very self-centered, and don't take accountability. There's all sorts of things that they point out. And at the same time, there's kind of an offshoot branch of that where
there are people that will point out how, don't you go after my cords. You know what? I'm going to have to save this rant for later. But basically, the idea is that the short of it is that to forego all setup, there are some men who sit there and say, well, you know, if the women are like this terrible breed of people, we should just forego them altogether. Or that, you know, if they are not holding up their end of the bargain of what it means to be married, then why in the world should I stay being married? And it's understandable, especially when the modern secularized, unoath-keeping women are extremely selfish, self-centered, and causing nothing but trouble in a person's life. It's very understandable that they would want to walk away. And, oh, you want to wrestle. I'm much bigger than you. I'm much bigger than you. You come by and you catch me on my foot. Look at you. Look at you. Do you see this? This is a cute kitty. I think it smacks of selfishness. A little bit. Because it is, and it's okay, because it's like if you have someone who is so completely self-centered, being able to sit there and protect yourself from that is not necessarily a bad thing for your health and your life. At the same time, it depends on the attitude you're going in with things. What would you stop going after the cords? If you, on the other hand, have a life that is mostly good, filled with mostly a good person as your spouse, but there are significant deficiencies because of time, effort, life, whatever. Like, they've proven themselves to be a good person, yet they have a major deficiency that causes so much pain and heartache for whatever reason or whatever it is. You know, do you get rid of that person? Do you believe in these same kind of things that are online? I would say no. And there are men who fight against that, who just sit there and say, yeah, I had my clergyman sit there and tell me I should stay with my wife and be another, you know, a wage slave to her for another 50 years or whatever else. I'm just like, yeah, well, it depends. Like, I agree, there are times where men should walk away if it is a very abusive, one-sided relationship where the other person has no intent on keeping oaths or covenants at all. And at the same time, if they're just generally a good person, but there's a major flaw, perhaps you should work on that and get your own house in order. There's no easy answer, and everyone's pain is different. But if you sit there and you keep looking at, oh, these people are able to go out and get this freedom, it's easy to become a watcher. And the same thing with, you know, the violence that's out there. Oh, ow, goober, just jump fully on my lap. I get it, you want to run around. Give me a moment. So another example is, oh, there's all these people who are protesting and causing destruction and violence for their side of the aisle. Why don't we do that? Why don't we evict change through causing destruction and burning buildings and towns and businesses to show our displeasure? Do you really want to unleash this cycle? Because again, you're looking at the world down in the valley, and you want to participate in that? That's what I'm warning against. Sorry, it was disjointed because of all these little kitties at my feet. But I hope you have a good day, and may God truly be with you.